This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, don't forget to send us your submission for your PR podcast plug. You know, we joke around that as PR people, we're great at promoting our clients, but we're lousy at promoting ourselves. And so we created this to make it easy for you to promote yourself and more specifically, your passion project. You know, it's that thing, your side hustle, right? Maybe you don't even make any money off of it. It's the thing you love to do. Maybe you've got a newsletter. Maybe you've got a killer TikTok or a LinkedIn page or something like that. Maybe you've got another resource that you want to share with the community. Maybe you want an award. Let us know by sending us a DM on any of our social channels. Twitter is probably the best or easiest, but you can certainly reach out to us anywhere or through my personal website, jodyfisherpr.com. There's an email address on there. But send us your PR podcast plug, and we will mention you at the top of an upcoming episode. Now let's get on with our show for today. We have a terrific guest. Sean O'Leary is Vice President of Susan Davis International, where he leads technology, government, and nonprofit clients in all areas of crisis communications, strategic communications, and media relations. He started his career as a newspaper reporter and has nearly 2 decades of experience in journalism, marketing, and public relations. He's been published in PR Daily and Capital Communicator and has been a guest on some other PR-related podcasts. But today, we got him here. Sean, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Thank you. Welcome. Glad to be here. It's fun to be the interviewee as opposed to getting the interviews. Well,
right. It's a different vibe, right? So tell us about your background. You and I have similar backgrounds, both, you know, reporters turned PR people. Tell us about your background, where you got started and how you made the transition.
So I started my career as a daily newspaper reporter up in Connecticut, small daily called The Chronicle in Willimantic, had about a 10,000 circulation. So I started my career there, and it was a very traditional newspaper role. I was the cub reporter covering local towns, town council meetings, assembly meetings, the police reports, all that fun stuff. So I did that for about 4 years, and then I moved over to the Hartford Business Journal. So kind of shifted to more, corporate coverage, business coverage. And frankly, that was around the time of the recession of the late 2000s, where a lot of journalists were getting laid off, not only because of the economy, but obviously the internet coming and kind of shifting how outlets work. So I was laid off. So my shift was a little bit forced to communications, but it was sort of interesting. So my first communications job was with the National MS Society in Connecticut. And I had actually worked with the woman there on some stories, and she said, she was telling me for years I would probably be good at PR. And I was like, no, I'm a reporter. I'm always going to be a reporter. And obviously I'm not a reporter anymore. So that's kind of how I shifted working for the National MS Society. And I will say that that has kind of informed my work in PR, just starting at the MS Society, because we were a very small nonprofit. So I got involved in everything. So it wasn't just the PR piece of, I'm going to get an interview with somebody, I'm going to be on TV. It was like the newsletters, it was updating the websites, it was marketing. So I kind of got a crash course in marketing and communications, which has served me very well moving forward.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because my first job in PR after leaving the news world, and I never call myself a journalist because journalists are sort of very educated people. I was a beat reporter. I was a street reporter. I was running around with my microphone, going to fires and getting my boots dirty. But my first job as a PR person was at a college. And got involved in lots of different things in a similar way that you said you got involved in lots of different things. And I frequently tell young people who are getting into PR, or even people who are further along in their career who want to get into PR, to go to a nonprofit. For two reasons. One is because a nonprofit will not be as selective or really have access to a larger talent pool that an agency might, right? And they will also, I think, be far more appreciative of the background of a journalist, because they'll understand the skills that the journalist brings to the table in terms of understanding what news is and understanding how to multitask, do lots of different things. And so it's interesting to hear you tell the story about how your first job was working with a nonprofit. I was at a nonprofit in higher ed. So similar background there. That's got to have really informed how you move through your career and all the way along to Susan Davis International, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's sort of two things I took from that first job that is kind of, kind of carried with me. And the first thing, this also goes back to being a newspaper reporter, is just figuring out the nugget of a story that is going to get the media's attention, is going to get you media coverage. When we were doing the MS Society, frankly, it was pretty easy because the stories we were telling were incredible. There were people that were, overcoming MS, or their caregivers who were, spending so much time and, volunteering their time. So it was sort of an easy intro to PR when you're telling stories like that. But it did sort of inform me moving forward that, you have to figure out the story. And I think that's the big thing, especially when I started to move on to work to more corporate clients, especially technology clients. They are so, how should I say this politely, but they're very focused on the sales piece of it, right? It's very internal what they're thinking about, right? How are we going to meet our numbers? How are we going to sell this? And as my job as sort of the PR person, and I kind of take this from my experience as a reporter, it's like, I know what you're trying to say, but how are you going to get people to listen to that? And kind of funneling that story through. So I just think that that's sort of been my differentiator through my career, is just that storytelling piece. And I think part of it too, and this also comes from being a reporter, is just telling people when something is a bad idea. As a newspaper reporter, I kind of learned to sort of not hold my tongue on things. And I think that's also served me well, because I think that I think one thing I've noticed with clients is they do not want to just have someone to just keep saying yes, right? If you hear a bad idea, part of your job as a PR pro is to say, wait a minute, that's a bad idea, that's a bad message, whatever it is. And it's also solution-based, right? It's not like this is terrible, let's throw it out. It's this is terrible, let's fix it. That kind of mindset, I think, has also come in handy for me.
Yeah, I frequently use the phrase, it's great that this is important to you, to the client. Let's make it important to everybody else. How do we make it important to the media that you want to cover it, or the audiences that you want to activate, whether they're buying your widget or they're going to your thing or whatever they're doing? We've got to make it important to that external audience and get it outside the four walls of the business.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most, I was going to say, sorry, you just kind of made me think of something, but I think one of the most important things we do at SDI, Susan Davis International, is the audience piece of it, which you just described, because there's so many, like the audiences are so fragmented right now between social media, traditional media, sort of how they're getting their information. So I think the audience piece of it, especially in the last 10 years, like when I started communications, we were thinking very basic in terms of audience, right? Let's go to the media, let's go to an email. And now there's a dozen different ways you can reach somebody. So that's a huge thing that's changed recently.
Let's stick on that and get a little granular. When you're talking about broadcasting a message out to an audience, what is your thought process? Or maybe could you describe your thought process of, how do you identify what audiences or what media to use? Whether that's earned, owned, social, whatever. How do you identify what media to use to get to your target audience?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think it's so different by client. And I think the most important thing to figure out is almost working from the end to the start, right? What are your goals? What is the end goal of this project? What is the end goal of this campaign? Because, for example, for nonprofits, sometimes their end goal, even though media relations is part of it, like fundraising is their ultimate goal. So at the end of the day, they want to raise a certain amount of money, whether that's through an article in the Washington Post or a viral social media campaign. At the end of the day, they just want the fundraising. For others, it's broad awareness, right? And then that would be, okay, where are the top tier outlets that we're looking for? But then we also have some clients, especially in technology, where it's really not niche, but they're going after specific audiences, right? If I'm selling cybersecurity solutions, what are the what are the cyber outlets that I want to go to? If I'm selling the Department of Defense, what are the defense outlets I want to go to? So I think that it's very unique. And I think that's something that's changed, where I don't think that there's just like a cookie cutter list that you can give to a client. You could kind of give it as a starting point, but it would be different between each client. Even clients that are doing the exact same thing might have different targeted outlets. And then the piece between earned, owned, and social, from my perspective, I kind of just think about those all sort of working together. An owned campaign has to work with an earned campaign that has to work with your social. So frankly, from my perspective, that's almost, I wouldn't want to say a red flag, but when we work with new clients, if we notice things are really like in silos, like the social media team isn't connecting with the comms team, that's something we have to change. And ditto for like marketing and communications, paid and earned. You just got to make sure everything's sort of working in concert. And there's so many more moving pieces than there were, even 5 years ago.
it can really be the Achilles heel of a good campaign, is to
Mhm.
have those teams siloed like that. And we're all aware that there can be a lot of chiefs in a room, and everybody wants to guard their little turf, right? Whether it's social or whether it's earned or whether it's owned. But they really do have to talk across each other, because you have to be sending one message.
Mhm.
And that's why I like to and I want to get your perspective on this. That's why I like to start any kind of a campaign with the exercise of writing a news release or a press release.
Mhm.
And it really be for two reasons. One, it's a very simple thing for people to wrap their heads around, like, oh, we're going to write a release, right? Everybody gets that. Oh, let's write a press release, even though many times that's not the thing you need to do. But the press release yields all this other content that can be used across all those other platforms. What's your take on that? And do you use news releases?
Yeah, I was about to say, I actually love news releases for several reasons. And especially right now in the age of Google, it's like when the first thing when you look for a company, the news releases are always going to be there. So I love the fact that if you have things, I mean, again, it has to be something worth announcing. But if you do have something worth announcing, whether it's, a new hire, a new project, a new whatever, I think it's good to get a press release out there, because to your point, not only does it get the news out there, but it can serve as a launching point for other things. And I've noticed this the most. One of our corporate clients has made several hires in like the last 6 to 9 months. And we always kind of have a quick conversation with the person we're writing the press release about, just kind of get their background, what they're in, what their focus areas are. And several times coming out of that initial call, it's like, you know what? You just said what could be an op-ed, or I think that might be something we could do an interview for. So my big thing with clients is I just like getting time on their calendar just to pick their brains, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, nothing, I don't want to take too much of their time, but you can learn so much about somebody. And this is another reporter trick, right? Just get them to start talking and keep talking. So if someone talks for about 15 minutes straight, you're going to learn everything about them. So I think that, to your point, and whether it's a press release or whether it's like an op-ed, but just some piece of content that forces that initial discussion, and then you can build so much more from it.
Yeah, you can really discover your subject matter experts that way too, right? I mean, if somebody comes on board with some special expertise, you're always looking for subject matter experts.
Mm-hmm.
You're always looking, and that it's probably one of the easiest ways to get press for an organization or a company or a nonprofit or whatever is by putting their subject matter experts out there to comment about on news that is going on, right? Do you use subject matter experts?
Absolutely. And I was about to say, I mean, especially in the tech world and being in DC with, the federal agency world, op-eds are such a great way to get, content into the media. And again, this goes back to what I was talking about with reporters. Like, newsrooms are smaller now, so they have less people that are able to actually do interviews. So they're looking for more contributed content. So that's an opportunity. And then just to your point about the op-eds, like what I've noticed a lot is that I will talk to a subject matter expert about what they think they want to talk about. And as they're talking, they will sort of unknowingly stumble into an even better story or something that ties into a news hook. And I love using subject matter experts. And the other thing too is, like, once you get like an op-ed out there, you can sort of use it as a credibility builder for future interviews. And the other thing that we've noticed a lot of that's been really great is that people will see an op-ed and they will invite an SME to be like a panelist for like a webinar or a speaking session at an event. So it kind of builds up that credibility. It's one of those things that you can just kind of keep building upon. So from my perspective, especially in, COVID has kind of made that too, is that, outlets like that contributed content, especially if it's well written and it's about good topics. So that's an excellent way, for our clients to kind of get their message out there. So that's a huge one for us.
Yeah, the op-ed can sometimes be the holy grail for a client, right? They love the idea of a long form piece, of 800 to 1,000 word piece in their name the publication, their daily newspaper or their specialty journal or whatever, with their name and their headshot next to it, right? That strikes at their ego. But as you said, it's also a really positive thing. Do you have a formula or a way or a method that you explore because the CEO comes here, I want to write an opinion piece, I want to write an op-ed. Do you have a way you walk them through that process of getting to the point where you've actually got something you can write?
Yeah, it's funny because this kind of goes back to how sort of different people operate. So sometimes with people with SMEs I work with, I'll like put together like an outline or maybe like a suggested abstract of like, I think this is the direction we should go in. So let's talk specifically about that. But then for other SMEs, it is really just as I hear them talk, I will just be taking notes, live stream, and then immediately afterwards be like, these are 2 to 3 of the ideas that came to my head. how does this feel to you? It's like a very collaborative process. And it just kind of goes back to the uniqueness of things, which there's just like no one formula that I've seen that works, for op-eds, for ghostwriting, because, for some people I ghostwrite, they sort of like trust me completely. So they're like, just write it and send it to me. And then other people are very protective over their writing. So either they want to do a first draft or they want to do the outline. And then you kind of, clean it up to a point where it's good for media. So the process can be very different. I think that's another thing that a good PR pro knows is how to work with a CEO, top level executive, and make them feel, okay, this process works for you, and I'll make it work for me too.
That's great. That's great. Are there things in your experience you found that are sort of like the kiss of death for an op-ed? Something that, maybe the client insists or wants to put in there, and that will just trigger a reaction in the editor to say, nope, we're not using it that way.
Yeah, the easiest one is just on the tech side when the marketing sneaks in there. They really want to get the name of the product in. And a lot of the times, you can write an op-ed that mentions the product, but you just can't name it, right? You can talk about what it does. You can talk about the outcomes. You just can't say, hey, we're this company selling this product. And too often, on the op-ed side, these tech companies, that's what they want to kind of get in there. And I will say this is also more true of like sort of startup tech companies. I worked for a startup tech company about 10 years ago, and the CEO just did not understand that like the marketing stuff is why this stuff will not get placed. We cannot talk about how great our software is. We cannot talk about how it's game changing. We have to focus on the issue. So I think that's been the biggest red flag for me, is just sort of the inward view sometimes from the tech side of things.
Yeah, I have the same opinion. And in fact, what I tell clients is, if you start to write a sentence that sounds like, at our organization, here's how we do it. If you start to say that, just strike it, just get it out.
And
that's the thing that's going to torpedo.
It's like you can get that in there. You just have to word it a little bit differently so it doesn't come across that way. And it's sort of a skill that you sort of learn over time. But yeah, it's it just happens.
We've all worked the last couple of years in this strange pandemic, and now I guess post-pandemic era that we're in. Have you found any particular challenges or any takeaways from anything that you've come across working with your clients or working with journalists? Any sort of trends or observations that you've made that are different from the way we used to do it before? I have a couple, but I'm wondering, I always like to ask what observations that other PR people have made in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is just obviously the sort of the formats of interviews. We're doing a lot more Zoom interviews and video interviews that we didn't do before COVID. But the biggest one for me is at Susan Davis International, we do some pretty big events, events where the president has shown up, events with like Tom Hanks. Like, we've done some big events. And in the past, they would only be covered by reporters on site. Like, if you sent them a live stream in 2018, they were not going to watch a live stream. But 2021, 2022, there are still reporters that will watch and record or report on something from a live stream. And a great example, the Military Women's Memorial we work with had their 25th anniversary back in October. And there were some military publications who were kind of located around DC that maybe in the past would have attended and covered, but instead they watched the live stream. They got the quotes from the Secretary of Defense, and they still wrote stories about it. So there's still media coverage, but it was just a very different dynamic. So that's something that we talk about with, our clients when they're doing events. Is a live stream is, almost necessary right now, not only for the purposes of their own audience, but it also opens up a whole world of media to cover it. And it just goes back. I mean, I think everything just goes back to the case of newsrooms have gotten so much smaller. Reporters have dual beats, they're taking photos, they're doing social media. So you need to make it easier for them. So they might be able to give you 30 minutes of their time to cover an event, but they don't have 3 hours to go to an event and go back. So that the time piece, actually, as I'm talking this out loud, I think it's the reporter's time that has probably changed the most since COVID.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I'm a big fan, people know, of when I have events with my clients, that I actually, not only do I organize the event, but then I cover it like a reporter. I'm shooting video, I'm shooting photo, because I'm sending that to desks after the fact, because I know that, just like you said, fewer and fewer reporters have the time to actually come out and cover something. They'll write it from their desk. I'm specifically thinking about a print reporter. If they can just get a couple of interviews over the phone, they'll cover an event like they were there, but they won't be there. and they'll interview the people remotely. They'll, the publication will send a reporter, a photographer or videographer to capture the images.
Yes.
And they'll just write the story.
Yeah.
So to your point, if the more that we can service the reporters with the raw materials that they need, the better coverage we'll get for our clients.
I was about to say, that's such a good point about the photography too, that so many outlets now will just run a picture. And I would say we did over the summer last year, there was a groundbreaking for a new Gulf War memorial in DC. And we got a lot of really good coverage, but the Associated Press sent a photographer, and the photos from the AP photographer must have ended up in every daily newspaper in the country. Talk about broad awareness. And it was, we did get the photographer there, but there wasn't an AP reporter there. There wasn't an official AP story. There was just these really good pictures that were sent out. So the photography piece, and especially for social media too, like what do the reporters want to put on their social media feed when they do go to an event? They don't want to just put up some words. They want to put up, hey, this is a really cool thing I went to. This is a picture. So the imagery and the video, that's a really good point that is, it was always important, but it's certainly become more important now.
An AP photo, that is a total score, because you and I both know that not just do you get the coverage that day or that news cycle, but that goes in the AP photo library and lives forever. Yeah. And so you could get traction on that photo 5 years down the line if it's that type of a photo.
Well, I mentioned the Military Women's Memorial 25th anniversary. Their AP took an incredible photo of the Secretary of Defense speaking at that event. And there have been subsequent times where there's been an unrelated story about the Secretary of Defense with this great picture. And it says, Secretary at the Military Women's Memorial. So the client continues to kind of get that little bit of coverage. So yeah, love when the AP shows up.
Love that. That's great. So looking ahead now in 2023, are you seeing any, we talked about some trends and sort of the way that the different ways that news has changed and different ways that reporters are covering the news. Are you seeing any trends now that are going to continue through 2023, or how are you adapting to reporters' needs as this year starts to kick off?
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think that anything that I haven't mentioned has changed. I think the one thing that we're sort of keeping an eye on is how reporters interact with social media, and specifically Twitter. Obviously, that is changing. And we've just kind of noticed that a reporter's relationship with Twitter and social media has kind of been changing, in the last couple of years. So I think that that's something, and I do not have a magic ball to say what's going to happen with it, but it does feel like there's sort of a shift happening, with the social media piece of things. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, unfortunately, I just feel like this contraction of the newsroom. One of the local outlets here announced a new reporter, and they basically announced that they were taking two beats into one. And this one person is going to be doing two. So it's just one of those things where that I think is going to be the biggest issue, especially for PR pros, right? It's like there are going to be less reporters to pitch, hopefully not less outlets. So how do you amplify the message? And you mentioned earlier with like earned media, digital media, social media. I just feel like no one is going to be strictly a PR pro in a couple of years, because you'd be missing too much of the other stuff. PR is going to be part of the job description.
Juggling the flaming chainsaws, as I like to say. Well, this has been a fun conversation. Thank you so much. We're going to segue now into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio. I have to update that reference because I'm probably dating myself. But we ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions. These are fun, meant to elicit a simple answer or maybe a laugh or two. So with your indulgence, here we go. Sean, rapid fire question number one. What is your favorite news source?
The first thing I check every day is ESPN.com.
Nice.
So they've been busy.
They've been busy. Rapid fire question number two. What's your favorite social media platform?
It's Twitter, but I don't know if it's going to be Twitter much longer.
Yeah, it's still mine too. It still reminds me of the old AP Newswire. It's just, clack in the corner of the newsroom.
Yeah, I'm like a sports fan too. So like the easiest way for me to catch up on sports is like 3 minutes of scrolling on Twitter. So until I find a better way to do that.
Makes sense. What are your teams? You brought it up. What are your teams?
My team. So my parents grew up on Long Island. So I'm a Jet fan. I'm an Islander fan. I switched baseball. I live in DC, so I switched baseball teams to the Nationals. But Islanders and Jets are the family team. So those are the two. Fortunately, they never win, but that's part of the deal.
Well, that's the long-suffering, Long Island-based sports fans for sure. Rapid fire question number three: coffee or alcohol?
If you asked me 5 years ago, alcohol. Today, coffee.
Love it. Rapid fire question number 4. What's your favorite on the run food? Now, you
Oh,
used to
on
be
the
a
run.
reporter. You used to be a reporter, so you got to have some good ones.
I was about to say it's McDonald's. There was a McDonald's right next to our old newsroom, and I probably ate that for about 4 years straight. So anytime I have McDonald's, I know I'm in a rush.
There you go. Rapid fire question number 5. Sean, what do you want to be after you finish this career?
Oh man, I usually tell people that I want to become a novelist, but now that sports gambling is legal, I think I want to be like one of those old guys that like retires out to Vegas and just gambles on sports. My grandfather retired out there like 20 years ago, and every time I visit him, I'm like, this is what I want to do. So sports gambler, I think, would be my answer.
Wow. That's a good one. We haven't had that one before. Well, Sean, this has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you online.
Yeah, so website is susandavis.com. My email is soleary@susandavis.com. And for social media, just search for my name on LinkedIn, and hopefully I'll pop up.
Fantastic. We know you will. Thanks again, Sean. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Apple. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.